Nobody told Brigid Talley that her house wasn't hers anymore. She found out on a Tuesday, March 17th, 11 o'clock in the morning. She was patting out cornbread dough by the wood stove when the two men showed up. A white truck pulled up out front on Galen Street, right in front of the sheet metal gate she'd painted blue. They got out without knocking. One carried a folder, the other carried a tape measure. Brigid didn't get up from the stove. She had her hand buried in the dough. The tip of her tongue ran along her upper lip, the way it always did before the first batch, tasting, feeling for the right point in the meal. And that morning the dough was good. It was just right. Her body registered it. Good dough. Bad day. "Morning, ma'am," said the one with the folder. "We're here on behalf of the buyer." Brigid looked at him. The white cloud over her right eye covered up a piece of the man's face. She saw him like through a dirty pane of glass. "What buyer?" The man opened the folder, pulled out a paper and set it down on the cedar table right on top of the flour she'd scattered without care. "The house was sold, February 28th. Here's the deed. We're here to take measurements for the handover." 76 years old Brigid Talley Sanders, 54 of them married. She had given birth to 3 children in the back room of that house. She had sat up all night with her dying mother in the front room. She had whitewashed those walls with her own 2 hands so many times she couldn't remember the original color of the boards anymore. And she found out the house wasn't hers, with her hand buried in the dough and a paper sitting on top of the flour that she couldn't even read, because Brigid knew how to sign her name. She didn't know how to read. She looked at the paper, saw letters. Letters that to her were just drawings, spidery little marks that said nothing. But she saw a signature down at the bottom that she recognized, because you recognize signatures even when you can't read. The one belonging to Crawford, her husband, and beside it another one, smaller, rounder, a signature she knew better than her own, because she had watched it grow from a child's scrawl in a school notebook. Juniper's. Her daughter's. She didn't say anything. She pulled her hand out of the dough, wiped it on her apron, slow, finger by finger. The one with the tape measure was already measuring the back wall, jotting numbers in a little notebook, talking to the other one about things Brigid didn't understand. Square footage, property line, demolition. "And where's my husband?" she asked. "We don't know, ma'am. We're just here for the measurements." Brigid nodded. She stayed standing by the stove. The fire crackled below, spitting sparks. A piece of cornbread was burning at the edge and nobody turned it. The smell of burnt corn filled the kitchen and stayed there, stuck to the walls, the whole time the men spent measuring. The smell of a good thing gone to waste, the smell of neglect, that was all, just like that, dry, just like that, quick. A whole lifetime and a paper on top of the flour. I have to explain who Brigid was before I go on, because if you don't know who she was, you won't understand what came after. And what came after is the whole story. There's a valley up in the Blue Ridge, deep in the Appalachian Mountains, where the ridgelines turn blue at dusk and the soil down in the bottoms is black and good for anything you put in it. Old country, this. Old-time fiddle country. The kind where folks still play on the courthouse steps without anybody paying them. The kind of place where on the last Saturday in July they hold the old dance, the one older than the church they built on top of it, where the men put on painted masks and walk the gravel roads cracking whips. The kind of place where whole hog is buried in a pit and smoked under the ground, covered with leaves, and you can smell the smoke 3 blocks before you reach the market square. Brigid lived on the other side. That's what the folks in town called her, part of the holler. The other side, like saying that side over there, the side of the people who have less. She never said it with that tone. She just said over the creek. Her house was on Galen Street, a wood and tin house, 1 story, with a little yard out back where she kept her wood stove, 2 pots of trumpet vine climbing yellow up the fence, and an apple tree her mother had planted the same year Juniper was born. All her life, from the time she was 12, she made cornbread by hand, on a clay griddle first and a sheet metal one later, patting the dough out with a rhythm the hands learn and never let go of. And she sold it on order to the diners at the market. Miss Pearl bought 8 dozen a day for her pulled pork stand. 2 other places bought less. That's how she lived, loaf by loaf, penny by penny. In picking season, from November to February, she'd leave somebody to watch the stove and go up the mountain to pick apples with the other women of the holler, hands flying through the branches, telling the ripe from the green by the tip of her fingers, filling the sack, earning by the bushel whatever the season gave. 50 years of that, 50 years of hands. Cornbread in the bottom, apples on the ridge, start over again. Her hands had gone smooth and shiny. The skin of her palms had turned slick and bright. No print left, like wax melted down and set again from all that brushing against the hot clay of the griddle. When she shook somebody's hand, folks felt that strange smoothness and stared at her. Old woman's hands. There aren't any others like them. And the cloud, the white cloud over her right eye, which had been growing slow over the last 4 years, already covered up more than half her sight. The young doctor at the clinic had told her it was a cataract, that they could operate, that with one operation she'd see again, that it cost money. He gave her a paper with the name of a hospital in the county seat and a number. Brigid put the paper in an empty coffee can and never went. There was no money for it. "I see fine with the left one," she'd say. "You don't need both to make cornbread." And so she'd gone along, looking at the world half clouded on one side, like somebody looking through a glass of milk. Crawford, her husband, had been a field hand, a tobacco cutter in his younger days, a mason's helper after that, hauling brick and mortar around the jobs in town, and these last years, nothing. Sitting on the bench by the courthouse watching the people go by, smoking whatever folks would offer him. A good man he never was. One of the worst he wasn't either. One of the in-between ones, the kind that don't hit but aren't there either. The kind that spend the week's money at the bar and come home quiet and lie down with their back to you without saying good night. 54 years of that. Brigid didn't complain. She had never complained. What for? A woman marries what she gets and cooks for him until one of the two of them dies. They had 3 children. The 2 boys left young. Joel, the oldest, to the city to be a mechanic. The youngest, Floyd, all the way west, to the coast. And of that one she hardly heard any more. He'd call in December if he remembered, talk 2 minutes, promise to visit, not visit. The one who stayed close was Juniper, the middle one. The daughter who lived in town, married to a man who ran a stationery shop across from the square and thought a lot of himself because of it. Juniper came on Sundays, sometimes ate, took cornbread home in a bag, grabbed whatever fruit there was from the yard and left. Brigid loved her the way you love your children, without measure and without a receipt. She'd save her the best of the stew, set aside the best apples of the picking, the ripest ones for her to take home. When Juniper had her children, Brigid raised them while the daughter worked at the shop, fed them from her own hand for years on end, taught them to pat out cornbread standing on a little stool by the stove. And she never charged for that, because that's not something you charge for. That's why the signature hurt more than her husband's. The daughter's. Crawford's didn't surprise her. A man who goes to the bar for 50 years can sell a house, sure, but Juniper's, the small round signature of Juniper down at the bottom of the paper as a witness, knowing, keeping quiet, letting the white truck pull up on a Tuesday at 11 without telling her mother, who had her hands in the dough. That's what got stuck crosswise in her. We have to stop here a minute, and it's worth hearing slow, because this isn't a detail. It's the center of everything. In this country there are thousands of older women who find out, already old, that the house where they lived their whole lives was never in their name, that the paper was the husband's, that the signature that counted wasn't theirs, and that one fine day a man shows up with a tape measure to measure the walls she raised with her own 2 hands. It doesn't make the news. It happens quietly in kitchens on Tuesdays at 11 in the morning, while a piece of cornbread burns at the edge of the stove. If you know a woman like that, a mother, a grandmother, a neighbor who ended up with no house of her own after a whole life of work, give this video a like and write her name down below and tell me what she knew how to do with her hands. And subscribe so the stories that are coming reach you. That's the only thing I ask. Let's keep going with Brigid. The men finished measuring around 1 o'clock. They picked the paper up off the flour, put it back in the folder. The one with the folder told her at the door that she had 30 days to move out, that the buyer was going to tear the house down, that he was going to put up something else there. Some rooms to rent or a storage shed. She didn't quite catch which, that she'd best start gathering her things with some time to spare so she wasn't rushing at the end. 30 days. Brigid shut the tin gate when they left. The gate made the same sound it always did, the creak she knew by heart. and for a second it struck her as absurd that a gate could sound the same on the day everything changed. She went back to the stove. The fire was down to pure coals. She used up the dough that was left, made the rest of the order for Miss Pearl, counted them, wrapped them in the cloth towel, and at 2 in the afternoon she carried them to the market like every other day, crossing the creek at the ford with the sack on her shoulder and the cold water up to her ankles. She didn't cry. She delivered the cornbread, collected for the day, and for the week Miss Pearl still owed her. She came back. That night she waited up for Crawford. He got home late, smelling of the bar, quiet as always. He sat down at the cedar table, the same one where they'd put the paper that morning. Brigid set the plate of beans in front of him with his cornbread, like 54 years of nights. "Did you sell the house?" she said. It wasn't a question. Crawford didn't look up from the plate. He broke off a piece of cornbread, folded it. "It was to pay off Joel's debt," he said after a long while. Joel. The one in the city, the mechanic, the one who'd gotten himself in deep with ugly people, people who collect debts the ugly way, people who don't wait, and who had called his father 2 months back, late at night, voice cracking, begging. And the father who had never done a thing for anybody in his life, who had never fixed a leak or carried a bucket of his own free will, did that. Sold the house where his wife slept to pull the sun out of the hole. "And why didn't you tell me?" Crawford chewed, swallowed, kept staring at the plate like there was something written in the beans. "Because you weren't going to sign." And there it was, the whole truth of 54 years in those 5 words. Because you weren't going to sign. The house had never belonged to the 2 of them. It had belonged to him. The deed, the paper, the name that counted. His. And he had known it all along and she hadn't. And the difference between knowing and not knowing in this country, in this kind of thing, is exactly the difference between a woman with a roof and a woman with no roof. A whole life patting out cornbread in that house, raising children in that house, whitewashing those walls, and the house had never been hers in the one place where houses belong to somebody, which is a paper kept in a drawer. Brigid got up from the table. She didn't argue, she didn't shout. People think old women who don't shout don't feel anything anymore. It's the other way around. It's that they already know the shout doesn't give anything back. The shout spends itself in the air and it's gone, and the house stays sold. What doesn't spend itself is what stays quiet. The quiet part gets stored away and works inside you, slow the way leavening works. She went to the back room, the one that had been the children's, the first one they were going to knock down, and she lay down dressed, on her side, looking at the boarded wall. And that night, for the first time in a long time, in a very long time, she thought about her mother. Her mother's name was Eulalia Sanders. She had died 55 years before, in 1971, when Brigid was 21, and Juniper was a newborn, just a few months old. She died in that room in that house of a fever the holler didn't know how to cure, and that any doctor now cures with a pill. But back then, no. Back then you died of a fever, and that was that. Eulalia had been a country woman, the real kind. The kind that went up the mountain at first light with a hoe on her shoulder. Before she came down to town, before the house on Galen Street, she'd had a little homestead up there across the creek, in a place the old folks called the Sycamore, after one enormous sycamore tree that grew next to the spring pond. It wasn't much, the place. A piece of hillside land, a clapboard crib, the pond where the animals drank, and some old heirloom coffee shrubs that Eulalia's grandfather, Brigid's great-grandfather, had planted in who knows what year, and that was so old by now they barely gave a bean. When Eulalia came down to town, she left the homestead. When she died, the homestead was left all alone. Nobody worked it, nobody wanted it. Crawford, the few times the subject ever came up, said it was nothing but rock and clay. Hillside dirt that wasn't good enough to bury the dead in, that nobody would take it even for free. And it went on sitting up there, eaten by brush for 55 years, while the family lived down below on the other side of the creek, in a house that in the end turned out not to be theirs either. Brigid hadn't been up to the Sycamore in decades. She had no reason to go up. It was a patch of abandoned woods on the point of a mountain. But that night, lying in the room they were going to tear down, with the good eye and the clouded one both open in the dark, looking at the ceiling of beam and lath, she remembered something. She remembered That her mother, fever already high, already almost gone, had grabbed her by the wrist with a strength that didn't seem like a dying woman's, and had told her something. Something Brigid had stored away in a corner of her mind for 55 years without ever taking it out, without even knowing she had it stored. "In the crib, my girl, up at the sycamore. I left you what's worth something. It isn't money, it's better than money. If one day you've got nothing left, go up for it. Promise me you'll go up." And Brigid, who was 21 and had a newborn crying in the bassinet and a mother dying in the bed, had told her yes. "Yes, Mama, rest," without really hearing, thinking it was the fever talking, the words of a dying woman, the things the dying say when they've already got one foot on the other side. She told her yes just to settle her, and Eulalia settled and died that same daybreak. 55 years had gone by, and she'd never gone up because she'd never had nothing left. Poor yes, always. But with her stove, with her house, with her corner. And a woman doesn't climb 3 hours of mountain to go looking for fever words when she's got a stove to tend, and cornbread to sell, and a life to hold up penny by penny. But now she had nothing left, exactly what her mother had said. If one day you've got nothing left, go up for it. Brigid lay there looking at the ceiling in the dark. The promise had come back whole, voice and all, with the weight of her mother's hand on her wrist and all, after 55 years of lying stored away. Maybe it was true. Maybe her mother had left something. Country people of the old days buried their money. They didn't trust banks. They put it in clay jars under the floors, in the walls, up in the lofts. Maybe Eulalia had hidden coins, old silver coins, the kind that are worth something now for being old. Something that, sold, would be enough for a room, enough not to end up on the street, not to go live as a charity case with Juniper, with the daughter who had signed for them to treat her like an old piece of furniture you can't throw out, but that's in the way. Maybe. She didn't sleep, thinking about it, turning it over, figuring in the dark how much a jar of old coins might be worth, what room she could rent, how much would be left. And before dawn, while the sky was still dark, she got up like every day of her life. Lit the fire, made the dough, tasted it with the tip of her tongue, the right point in the meal, like always. And that daybreak the dough tasted bitter to her, or she felt it bitter. Sometimes the bitter is in the dough, and sometimes it's in your own mouth, and sometimes it's just in the day that's about to start. She made the cornbread for the order, left it ready, and counted and wrapped for Crawford to carry down if he remembered, which he wasn't going to remember. And before the sun came up, she put on her good shoes, the ones for church, grabbed an empty sack, a tallow candle, a box of matches, and her husband's old hatchet, and she went out the tin gate without telling a soul. She crossed the creek at the ford, with the icy March water climbing up her legs, and on the other side, where the trail started, she began to climb the mountain. To the sycamore it was about 3 hours on foot for a healthy person, for a woman of 76 with a cloud in one eye. More. The trail climbed up through scrub, through thorny brush and brambles loaded with green berries, between loose stones that rolled under her shoe, threatening to throw her. The sun came up slow behind the mountain, and then it wasn't slow anymore. It hit hard, kicked up the dust off the trail. Brigid climbed step by step, stopping every so often to catch her breath, leaning on the hatchet like a cane, feeling her heart pound in her chest in a way that, at her age, wasn't to be trusted. She passed a giant oak, one of those trees that take more than 100 years to grow, with a trunk thick as 3 men and a shade as wide and cool as a room. She sat down underneath it to rest a while in the roots, listening to the birds, feeling the sweat dry on her back. She thought about turning back. She thought about it seriously. 76 years old, alone on the mountain, looking for fever words from half a century ago. Anybody with any sense would have turned back. She didn't turn back. Higher up, at a bend in the trail, she crossed paths with an old man coming down on a mule loaded with firewood. The old man touched his hat. "Morning, ma'am. Where to so early and so all alone?" "I'm going to the sycamore," said Brigid. The old man narrowed his eyes, sizing up the mountain. "Nobody lives up there anymore, ma'am. That's been abandoned since I was a boy." "I know," said Brigid. The old man shrugged, tugged the mule's lead and kept going down, disappearing around the bend in the trail. He didn't show up again. He was just an old man crossing the mountain one morning, carrying his firewood to wherever he was carrying it, the way the old countrymen cross the mountains, with no reason but to go where they're going. Brigid watched him go and kept climbing. Around 9:30 in the morning, sweated through, with her dress stuck to her back and her shoes white with dust, she arrived. The sycamore was worse than she remembered. 55 years of abandonment weigh on the boards the way they weigh on people. The crib had fallen in on one side, the roof sunk inward, the lath beams open to the air, black, eaten by termites, hanging like the ribs of an animal long dead. The pond was dry, a puddle of mud cracked into squares, with 2 white herons standing in the mud, still, watching her without moving, like they'd been waiting on her for half a century. And the sycamore. The sycamore was still there, enormous, bigger than memory kept it. The roots came out of the ground like twisted old arms, and the trunk was so wide that 4 people holding hands couldn't have hugged it around. It had survived everything, the mother, the abandonment, the forgetting, 55 years of nobody coming up. It was still green, still giving a wide, cool shade over the fallen crib, like it was looking after it, like it was keeping watch over a grave. Brigid stopped under the sycamore to get her breath back, and from there, looking at the hillside above, what left her stunned were the coffee shrubs. They were alive, eaten by brush, yes, choked in creeper, yes, leaves dusty, branches crooked, growing wherever they could, but alive. The heirloom coffee of the great-grandfather, the shrubs that Crawford swore didn't give anymore, that were nothing but dry sticks good for kindling, were still giving. Among the green leaves there shone, here and there, a few red cherries, ripe, fat. 55 years with nobody to prune them, nobody to water them, nobody to want them or even remember them. And they were still giving coffee, because the shrubs don't die when the one who planted them dies. They die when the care runs out. And something, the rain of every season, the shade of the sycamore, the stubbornness of the black mountain dirt, or who knows what, had gone on caring for them in its own way, without hands, all that time. Brigid stood looking at the shrubs a long while. Something moved inside her, and she couldn't put a name to it. Then she shook herself. She hadn't climbed 3 hours to look at coffee shrubs. She'd climbed up to find what her mother left. What's worth something? She went into the crib, ducking in where the roof had fallen less, where there was still a piece of shade and standing wall. Inside it was dark and smelled of closed-up earth, of half a century of dust, of an old dead animal, of damp without sun. She lit the tallow candle with a match. The shaky flame barely lit a small circle. There was a rotted wagon wheel in one corner, a grinding stone broken in 2, piles of things that time had undone until you couldn't tell what they'd been anymore, cobwebs thick as rags hanging from the beams. And she started to look. She looked first in the corner where her mother had kept the altar, where she remembered a niche in the wall with a clay figure of the Virgin. The niche was still there, empty, with a stain of old wax in the bottom. Nothing. She put her hand in up to the elbow in the hollow. Nothing but dirt and an old nest of some animal. She looked under the stones of the hearth, moving them one by one, the smoke-blackened stones where her mother had boiled coffee and corn, and underneath there was nothing but the packed floor hard as stone, that too, nothing. She looked in the walls, tapping the boards with the back of the hatchet, slow, where the wood looked dried out, where it sounded hollow, the way she'd heard folks hid things in walls. The wood crumbled in dry pieces. Behind it, there was nothing but more wood. Nothing. She spent 3 hours looking. The candle burned down. The sun passed over the hole in the roof, marking the hour on the dirt of the floor like a clock, and started to come down the other side. Brigid sat on the rotted wagon wheel, her face dirty with dust and cobweb, her shiny hands now black with dirt, the sack still empty, and for the first time she felt truly tired. Not the tiredness of the body, that one she knew well, but another, the tiredness of the one who climbs 3 hours to look and doesn't find. It was fever talk, she thought. My mother was delirious. There's nothing. I came up for nothing. I'm going to be left with no house and nothing. And I climbed a whole mountain chasing the words of a dying woman from 55 years ago. She sat there, beaten, looking at the floor. And looking at the floor, she raised her eyes slow, and up there, in the piece of roof that hadn't fallen, she saw it. A loft. Day highboard, a half-floor of lath sticks tied with twine wedged between the two beams that still held, where the country people kept the corn from the harvest, up high, away from the mice and the damp of the ground. Brigid hadn't remembered it. 55 years, and the mind keeps some things and lets others go without asking permission. But there it was. And up on the loft, between the grey dust and the cobwebs, you could make out a square shape, dark, that didn't belong to the mountain, that hadn't been put there by time or by the animals. Brigid's chest jumped. She dragged the rotted wagon wheel under the loft, tested it with one foot. It held more or less. She climbed up on it with an old woman's care because at 76 a fall isn't a fall, it's the end. It's being left lying on a mountain where nobody comes up to look for you. She stretched her arm. The tips of her fingers brushed the edge of the loft, the cobwebs, the dust. She stretched more, up on the toes of her shoes on the wheel that wobbled. She touched wood, good wood, not rotted, protected by being up high in the shade, far from the water. A wood smooth and cold under the slick pad of her fingers. She pulled. Something dragged across the lath with a dry sound. Brigid pulled more, and the thing came toward the edge, and she caught it with both hands before it could fall, and she got down off the wheel with it pressed against her chest, and she sat down on the ground, in the dirt, with her back against the board wall, breathing hard. It was a chest, a wooden chest, not very big, the size of a shoebox but deeper, with the corners reinforced in tin and a lid that closed with nothing but a twisted wire latch, no padlock. The wood was darkened by the years but whole sound. Brigid set it on her knees. It weighed little, too little, so little that her heart sank a bit, because gold is heavy, coins are heavy, and this weighed almost nothing. Maybe it's bills, she thought. Bills don't weigh anything. Maybe my mother saved up bills. She passed the palm of her hand over the lid, wiping off the layer of grey dust, and underneath appeared the wood with a pretty grain, dark brown, and some marks made with a knife in one corner. Some lines that her mother, who knows what for, had put there. She brought the candle close, looked for the latch. The wire was rusted, fragile as a metal cobweb. She started to unwind it with fingers clumsy with dirt, slow turn after turn, holding her breath without realizing she was holding it, until the wire gave and snapped and fell to the floor. The lid lifted with a long groan of a dried-out hinge, and inside there were no coins. Inside there were no bills. Inside there were bundles, wrappings, things wrapped in dry banana, in dry corn husk, blackened by time, tied with thread. 6, 7 bundles arranged with care, one next to the other standing up, ordered the way a hand orders them when it knows exactly what it's putting away and why. And from inside the chest, when she opened it, a smell rose up. A smell of earth and smoke and old ash. A dry, deep smell that Brigid knew without knowing where she knew it from. A smell from way back in her memory, from her mother's kitchen, from when she was a child and slept on a pallet by the hearth from before all of it. On top of the bundles, there was a paper folded in 4. Brigid took it out first, unfolded it with the care of somebody unfolding something that can break, because the paper was dried out and cracked at the folds, marking white lines in each crease. It was her mother's writing. She recognized it right off. Big writing, uneven, worked out with effort. The writing of somebody who learned her letters grown and never fully mastered them, who wrote like somebody carving, pressing the pencil hard enough to mark the paper on the back. And Brigid didn't read fluently. The letters were still drawings. But her mother had taught her as a child to put a few words together, the few, the important ones, and those she matched on the paper the way you match familiar faces in a crowd. She matched the word girl. She saw it clear at the start, opening the paper. Girl. She matched the word seed, repeated several times. Seed, seed. She matched the word life, and down at the bottom, written with more care than all the rest, with the writing tightest and straightest, like somebody writing something they really want to last, 2 words together in the old tongue, the tongue her grandmother spoke, and that her mother still chewed in pieces, and that in the holler almost nobody spoke anymore. Words from before, words Brigid had heard as a child, and that rang in her head with her mother's voice, even though she no longer quite knew what they meant. She didn't understand the whole paper. She understood enough to make her hands start trembling, and to make a knot rise from her chest to her throat. She set the paper down on her knees with care and took the first bundle. The dry corn husk crackled the moment she touched it. She started to untie the thread, slow, but the thread was so old it didn't need untying. It came apart on its own between her fingertips, turned to dust, strands that broke at the slightest brush. Brigid opened the corn husk, wrapped over on itself, and the husk, dried out for more than half a century, didn't unwrap. It broke. It cracked into dry pieces, into black, brittle flakes that stuck to the waxy skin of her hands, that got down between her fingers, that fell on her skirt and on her mother's paper, and from inside the broken husk, among the black flakes crumbling in her hands, something moved, something rolled, something came loose from the broken wrapping and fell toward the bottom of the chest with a dry, small sound, a sound of many tiny, hard things, rolling and knocking against the wood and bouncing and gathering in the corner. If this story is getting hold of you, let me ask you one thing before you find out what fell to the bottom of that chest. Because what Brigid's mother kept up in that loft, wrapped in corn husk and tied with thread, what she called what's worth something better than money, it wasn't gold, it wasn't silver, it wasn't bills, it was none of what Brigid had climbed 3 hours of mountain to find. It was something else, something that changed everything, and that was no good for paying anything. Write down below the name of the older woman in your family who had the most hands for the field or the kitchen, and subscribe, and give it a like if you want to know what Eulalia Sanders kept for 55 years and what Brigid did with it. Because that's what really matters, and it's coming now. What rolled to the bottom of the chest was seeds. Coffee seeds, dry, parchment-skinned, a color between brown and faded green, the size of a fingernail. Gathering in the corner of the wood like a handful of little pebbles, Brigid put her fingers in, touched them. They were hard, smooth, cold. They smelled of old coffee, of earth, of something roasted long ago. She lifted one up to her good eye, brought it close, looked at it, turning it between thumb and forefinger. It was a coffee seed, a whole seed with its little parchment skin still stuck to it. The shrubs out there, the living shrubs of the great-grandfather. This was from them. This was them, before they were them. She opened the second bundle. The corn husk broke the same way into black flakes, and inside there were more seeds, but different, bigger, darker, almost black, glossy. Corn. Kernels of corn of a blue so dark it looked black. The blue corn of the high country. The kind you plant for the holiday bread and the harvest porridge. The kind almost nobody planted in the region anymore, because it yielded less than the yellow you buy at the store. Brigid sank her hand in them. They rang as they moved, that dry sound of kernel on kernel that she'd known her whole life, the sound of corn falling in the bucket, the sound of her childhood. The third bundle, beans. Speckled beans, pinto of several kinds mixed, each kind with its own marking. The fourth, corn again, but white from a long ear. The fifth, seeds she didn't recognize at first and then did. Squash, fat pumpkin seed, and some smaller ones that could have been pepper or field tomato. The sixth, a mix of small dark things Brigid didn't know right away. Herbs, maybe, wild greens, something to eat from the mountain. The seventh bundle was the smallest of all, and inside, wrapped apart in its own piece of husk, there was a single ear of corn. A whole ear, small, of red and white speckled kernels, dry, perfect, kept whole the way you keep a mother seed, the best of the harvest, the one you set aside to plant again. Brigid sat there on the ground with her back against the boards, the open chest on her legs. The 7 bundles opened around her, and seeds of every kind scattered over her skirt and over her mother's paper, and over the floor of the crib. And she laughed. A short, dry laugh, no humor in it, the kind of laugh that doesn't know whether to laugh or what. Seeds. Her mother had saved seeds. 55 years. That was what's worth something. That was better than money. The first thing Brigid thought, sitting there, was anger. A small, tired anger. I climbed 3 hours. I broke my legs on the mountain at 76 with a cloud in my eye. I sold my last hope to these fever words, and what my mother left me, what she called treasure, is old seeds that probably don't even work anymore, that probably don't even sprout. Handfuls of dry grain that anybody has in their kitchen. It's not enough for a room. It's not even enough for the bus fare back, if I had to pay it. My mother sent me up a whole mountain for a few handfuls of corn. She took the paper again, looked at it, the spidery marks, girl, seed, life, and at the bottom, the 2 words of the old tongue, written with such care. And she remembered what those 2 words meant. To tell properly what happened inside Brigid in that moment, we have to go much further back. We have to go back to when Brigid was a child and went up that same mountain, that same hillside with her mother and her grandmother to plant. The grandmother's name was Constance Wells. She was one of the old ones, the kind that spoke the old tongue from the cradle and learned English already grown and by force, chewing it without quite wanting to. Her face was like a map, furrowed with deep wrinkles, and her hands were small and hard as roots. When Brigid was 6, 7, 8 in planting season, Grandmother Constance would take her by the hand up to the sycamore, the 2 of them climbing the mountain at first light, the girl ahead jumping among the stones, the old woman behind, slow, carrying the sack of seeds. And up on the hillside the grandmother taught her. She taught her that you taste the dirt before you plant, that you take a handful, you smell it, and sometimes you put the tip of your tongue to it, not to swallow it, but to know if it's alive. Dead dirt doesn't taste of anything, my girl, the grandmother would say. Good dirt tastes deep. If you don't feel the taste of it, don't plant there, because you'll be planting for nothing. And Brigid the child would take her handful of dirt and put it to her tongue, copying the grandmother. And at first she didn't feel anything, and the grandmother would laugh. Not yet, my girl, the tongue learns slow. And one day, already older, all of a sudden, yes, all of a sudden, the dirt tasted of something to her. It tasted of mineral, and of deep, and of alive. And the grandmother saw it in her face and said, there, now you've learned. Now you've got a planter's tongue. And that was one of the things that gave Brigid the most pride in all her childhood, more than anything from the school she barely went to. The grandmother taught her to open the furrow, to measure with the eye the distance between seed and seed. Not so close they fight over the food, not so far you waste the dirt. She taught her to plant the beans among the corn. The corn goes up and the bean climbs on it. They help each other that way it ought to be among people. And the squash at the edges so it covers the ground with its big leaves and the dirt doesn't dry out and the weeds don't come. The whole garden, the 3 together, corn, beans, squash, looking after one another like a family that really looks after its own. And she taught her, above all, about the seed. Grandmother Constance, before she threw each handful of seed into the furrow, would lift it to eye level, look at it, and say 2 words in the old tongue, and then kiss the handful of seed. She kissed it the way you kiss the forehead of a sleeping child, with the lips barely touching, and only then did she plant it. Why do you kiss it, Grandma? Brigid the child asked her once. Because it's our flesh, my girl, the grandmother said. These 2 words mean that. There's no way to say it right in English. It means something like the one that makes us. The seed is the one that makes us. From the seed comes the corn. From the corn comes the bread. From the bread come us. You are bread, my girl. I am bread. Your mother is bread. All of us who are from here are corn that learn to walk. That's why you kiss the seed, because you're kissing yourself, and those who come after, and those who will eat from what you plant when you're not here anymore. The seed is the only thing that truly doesn't end. The money ends, the house falls down. The seed, if you keep it and plant it, goes on forever, my girl. It goes on when you don't go on anymore. Brigid was 7 when the grandmother told her that. She didn't understand it then. So she stored it away, the way children store the big things they're told without understanding them, in a deep corner, to understand 69 years later, sitting on the floor of a fallen crib with a chest of seeds on her legs and the house sold down below the mountain. Grandmother Constance died when Brigid was 9, and the mother, Eulalia, went on going up to the sycamore to plant, now with the girl by the hand, repeating what the grandmother had taught her. The same 2 words before each handful of seed, the same kiss. Eulalia planted on that hillside until Brigid married, and they all came down to town, to the house on Galen Street, to the life of the Bottoms, to the market cornbread, and the children and the quiet husband, and the sycamore stayed up there waiting, the way the lands wait for the blood that planted them to come back. That's why, when Eulalia was dying of fever, what she left in keeping for her daughter wasn't money. A woman who learned from her mother that the seed is your own flesh, that the seed is the only thing that doesn't end, doesn't save coins for the bad day. She saves seed. She goes up to the sycamore, or has it gone up for her in her last months, already sick, and sets aside the best of each kind, the blue corn and the white, the beans of every marking, the squash, the great-grandfather's coffee, the wild greens, the mother ear. She wraps it in corn husk with ash so the weevil can't get in. She takes it up to the loft so the water can't reach it, nor the mouse. And she leaves her daughter the one inheritance that, for a country woman of the old days, is worth more than all the money in the world. What to start over with the day you've got nothing left. Sitting in the crib, 69 years after the grandmother taught her to kiss the seed, all of that came back to Brigid at once, and something settled in her chest, slow. The way the grounds settle in the bottom of the coffee, and the water on top clears and you can see all the way down. Her mother hadn't left her money because she didn't have money. She had left her what she did have, what was truly worth something. The living shrubs out there. The great-grandfather's coffee had given for 55 years with nobody caring for it, stubborn, surviving everything. What was in the chest was of the same blood as those shrubs, chosen seeds the best, set aside by a hand that knew exactly what it was doing and what for. And the mother, dying in her 40s with a daughter of 21 and a granddaughter of months, hadn't saved that for herself. She was already going. She saved it for a day that wasn't going to come for her, for the day her daughter would have nothing left. She knew the way mothers know that that day might come. And she left ready what you leave for the days of nothing, what to start over with. She didn't leave her a room. She left her what to make a room with. She didn't leave her food. She left her what to plant food with for all the years she had left, and for the ones that would come after her. If one day you've got nothing left, go up for it. Brigid kissed a handful of the seeds. She didn't know why she did it. The hands did it on their own. The hands remembered the grandmother, even if the head hadn't ordered it. She lifted the handful of blue corn to eye level, looked at it with her good eye, said low the 2 words of the old tongue that came out of her hole from a corner where they'd been stored for 69 years, and she kissed it, and kissing it at last she cried. Not much. A short while. Old woman's tears, the kind that come a few at a time and cost you. She cried for her mother, who died thinking about this day. She cried for the girl she'd been, the one who kissed the seed without understanding. She cried for everything that had ended in 1 week, and for the only thing she had left. What was this? A chest of grain on a forgotten mountain. And she stopped crying, because the old women who have worked their whole lives don't stay long in the weeping. The weeping, like the shout, spends itself. What doesn't spend itself is the work. She gathered the scattered grains from her skirt one by one, with those shiny fingers that knew how to pick grain off the ground from so much harvesting, and put them back in their bundles, separating the coffee from the corn, the blue corn from the white, the beans from the seeds without making a mistake, because the hands knew each seed by touch before the clouded eye could tell them apart. She wrapped back up what she could in pieces of the old husk, and what she couldn't, she set loose in the bottom of the chest. The speckled ear, the mother seed, she wrapped in her own apron and put aside against her chest. She closed the chest, got up. It was hard to get up. Her legs had gone numb on the cold floor. She had to lean on the wall. She came out of the crib carrying the chest with both hands. Outside the sun was already going down and hit her full in the face. The herons were still in the dry pond. The coffee shrubs greened on the hillside with their red cherries. Brigid stood under the sycamore with the chest in her hands, looking at the shrubs, looking at the mountain, looking at her mother's fallen homestead. And she thought something she hadn't thought on the way up. Nobody sold this homestead. This land was still here, forgotten. Yes, eaten by brush. Yes, nothing but rock and clay, Crawford had said. Dirt that wasn't good enough to bury the dead in. But nobody had sold it because nobody had wanted it, because it wasn't worth anything to the ones who measure worth in money. And precisely for being worth nothing to them, it was still here, hers, her mother's, her grandmother Constance's, who taught her to kiss the seed, her great-grandfather's who planted the coffee, with no paper, maybe, no deed, no name in any drawer, but hers in the way the land you've watered with your blood is yours, and that nobody else wanted to take from her because nobody else wanted it. The house on Galen Street, the one that had a paper, the one that was worth something, the one that was useful, that one they'd sold without telling her. This patch of mountain that wasn't worth anything, this one nobody could take from her because nobody wanted it. Brigid came down the mountain that evening slower than the way she'd come up, the chest pressed against her chest, stopping often, not from tiredness now, but to look. She looked at the hillside, looked at where the sun hit and where the shade fell, calculating the way the grandmother taught her, where the corn, where the beans, where the squash that holds up better to the sun. She looked at the pond and thought that with cleaning it out and waiting for the rains, the water would gather again. She looked at the coffee shrubs and counted them with her good eye. 30, 40 shrubs, the ones still giving. She looked at the fallen crib and thought that with shoring up the piece of roof that was left, a room, one room, was enough to sleep in. A person doesn't need much. A bed, a stove, a roof. The rest is in the way, and at 76 you already know how to tell what's useful from what's in the way. She crossed the creek at the ford at dusk, with the water black and cold, the chest held high so it wouldn't get wet, and on the other side, on the bank of stones, she sat a moment to get her breath back before going into town, because she didn't want to arrive at the house on Galen Street with the face she was wearing. A face can't be hidden, but it can be set right. And Brigid set hers right on the bank of the creek, watching the water run black between the stones, feeling the cold climb from her wet ankles to her knees, before getting up and walking the blocks she had left, with the chest pressed against her chest, like somebody carrying a sleeping newborn. She got home in full dark. The house was dark. Crawford was already snoring in the front room, oblivious, round, sleeping the easy sleep of those who carry nothing inside them. Brigid didn't turn on a light. She knew the house with her eyes shut. Every dip in the floor, every corner of furniture, the counted steps from the door to the stove. She set the chest on the cedar table, the same one where they'd put the paper of the sale that Tuesday, and stood a while in the dark kitchen with her hand resting on the wooden lid, feeling under her shiny palm the cold grain of the old wood. 30 days, they'd told her. 3 were already gone. That night she slept for the first time since the Tuesday of the white truck. She slept straight through, no tossing. A deep sleep, no images. The sleep of one who has already decided something and rests for it, even if she still can't say out loud what it was she decided. The body knows it before the mouth, the hands know it before the head, and Brigid's hands that night rested still on the blanket, open like seeds set out to dry. She woke before the rooster. She made the dough, made the cornbread for Miss Pearl's order, counted it, wrapped it, but this time before going out she did something she'd never done. She set aside a handful of her own dough corn, the corn cooked with lye that she had soaking for the day's dough, and hid it in a clean cloth inside the sack. She didn't quite know what for. The hands did it. The head came behind, slow, explaining to itself what the hands already knew, that from this day on everything that passed through her hands she was going to keep a little of to plant, that a woman who has learned again what's worth something doesn't let the seed go whole out her mouth anymore. She carried the cornbread to the market, crossing the ford like every day. But the road tasted different to her. The same stones, the same cold water, the same sack on her shoulder. And yet, she went looking upward, toward the mountain, toward where the sycamore was hidden in the morning fog, calculating with her good eye how many days it would take her to clear the first hillside when the seasonal rains started, what she'd need. Brigid's head, which for 50 years had thought of nothing but cornbread and pennies, had started thinking about furrows. At the market, Miss Pearl paid her for the 8 dozen and the week behind. She was a big woman, ruddy in an apron stained with grease and pork, who'd been buying cornbread from Brigid for 30 years, and who knew her the way you know the people you see every day, without knowing a thing about them. Brigid told her, while she handed over the cloth with the warm cornbread. Just like that, no drama, like somebody remarking on the weather, that they'd sold her house, that she had to move out, that in less than a month she'd be looking for somewhere to go. Miss Pearl stopped counting the coins. "What do you mean they sold your house, Brigid? Who?" "My husband, to get Joel out of a fix." "And did you sign?" "I didn't sign anything. The house was his. Turns out it was always his. Miss Pearl went quiet. There are silences that say more than any condolence. Miss Pearl's was one of those. Then she wiped her hands on her apron, reached into the wooden box where she kept the Stan's money, and went to give Brigid a handful of bills, just like that, without counting them, in the rough, good way the market people help each other when misfortune hits one of their own. No, Miss Pearl, thank you truly, but no. Come on, Brigid, don't be proud, so you can get yourself settled somewhere. It's not pride. It's that I've already got somewhere. And saying it, she knew it. She said it and heard herself say it, and she knew it was true, that it was no longer a loose idea from the night on the mountain, but a thing decided, settled, firm as a hearthstone. I've already got somewhere. Miss Pearl didn't understand. Of course, she figured Brigid was going to her daughter's, to Juniper's, and Brigid let her think whatever she wanted, because what she was going to do can't be explained at a pork stand mid-morning. It can hardly be explained anywhere, because the people of the bottoms, the ones who measure the worth of land by what it gives in money, don't understand that somebody would choose a bare mountain over a rented room in town. But I have to tell how she told Juniper, because that one has to be told slow. Juniper came on Sunday the way she came, with the bag for the cornbread and the habit of grabbing fruit from the yard. She came late, already past noon, with the husband waiting for her in the truck outside, honking the horn every so often to hurry her along. She came into the kitchen with her usual step, the step of somebody walking into a house she considers hers, even though she hasn't set foot in it in 2 weeks, and she found her mother sitting at the cedar table with the wooden chest open in front of her, and the 7 bundles of seeds lined up on the table, and the speckled ear, the mother seed, set in the center like on an altar. "What's that, Mama?" Brigid didn't look up from the seeds. She had in her hand a fistful of blue corn, letting it fall slow between her fingers back into the bundle, grain by grain, that gesture of hands that know the grain and find comfort in it. "What your grandmother Eulalia left me." Juniper looked at the bundles, looked at the seeds. A wrinkle of annoyance crossed her forehead. That wrinkle she got as a child when they wouldn't buy her what she wanted, and that as a grown woman had stayed marked there. Seeds. You climbed the mountain for seeds. Mama, for God's sake, at your age, who let you go up alone? You could have fallen. You could have died up there and nobody finds out for a week. I didn't fall. But you could have. Juniper sat down across from her, on the other side of the table, with the sigh of somebody bracing for a conversation she considers a waste of time. "Look, Mama, I already talked to Reuben." Reuben was the husband, the one with the stationery shop. "You can stay with us. We'll fix up the junk room, the one in back. A bed fits. It's not big, but it fits. You'll be there while we figure out what to do." And there it was. The junk room, the room of clutter. They were offering her mother, the woman who had raised her, who had looked after her children for years on end, who had always set aside the best grain of the coffee for her, the room where they kept what was in the way, and they were offering it with the face of a favor, with the face of a sacrifice, like somebody performing a heavy charity. Brigid let the last grain of blue corn fall into the bundle, raised her eyes, looked at her daughter with the good eye, and with the clouded one, both of them straight on. "You signed, Juniper." It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a reproach. It was like setting a stone down on the table, a stone that had been there since Tuesday, and that somebody was finally naming. Juniper opened her mouth, closed it, the color rose to her face. "Mama, I saw your signature under your daddy's, the small round one. I've known it since you were making it in the school notebook. It was right there on the paper on top of my flower. You knew. You knew before the truck came, and you didn't tell me. Mama, let me explain." Juniper was talking fast now, with that haste of guilt that wants to cover itself over with words. "Your daddy, my daddy asked me to sign as a witness. He told me it was a formality you already knew about. He swore to me that you already knew, Mama. I thought you agreed. If I'd known they hadn't told you." "You what?" Silence. The truck horn sounded outside, twice, impatient. Juniper didn't move. For once she didn't move toward the horn. She sat looking at her mother's hands on the table, those shiny hands that had bathed her as a child, that had patted out her first pieces of cornbread, that had set aside the best coffee for her for 50 years, And she found nothing to say because there was nothing to say. Because when you sign as a witness to the sale of your mother's house, the truth can't be fixed with explanations anymore. "I'm not telling you so you'll cry," said Brigid, and her voice had no edge. It had something worse than edge, it had calm. "What's done is done. The house was sold. I'm not asking you to get it back, because you can't. I'm telling you so you know. So you know that I know, because between you and me, from this day on, there's not going to be that lie in the middle, not that. The rest, whatever you want, but not that lie." Juniper started to cry. Real crying, ugly, runny-nosed. The crying of somebody who suddenly sees herself in the mirror her mother is holding up in front of her and doesn't like at all what she sees. She tried to take Brigid's hands across the table. Brigid didn't pull them away, but she didn't give them either. She left them there, still among the seeds, neither offering themselves nor refusing, which is how a mother truly punishes, not with the shout, but with the hand that's there but doesn't close. "Then come with us," said Juniper through the crying. "Let me do something for you, even if it's just that. The room. Mama, come to the room." "No." "Then where are you going to go? Where, Mama? You've got nothing. You've got no house. You've got no money. I've got the sycamore." Juniper stopped crying out of pure surprise. The crying dried up all at once, the way a puddle dries in strong sun. "The sycamore, Grandma's homestead. Mama, that land is no good for anything. My daddy always said, it's nothing but mountain, nothing but rock and clay. There's no water, there's no power, there's no road for a car. It's 3 hours on foot. You're going to go live up there alone at 76. You're going to die up there, Mama. You're going to die of cold or of a fall or of hunger, and nobody's going to know." "Maybe," said Brigid, "but I'll die in what's mine." And those 3 words, "what's mine," fell on the cedar table with a weight Juniper had never heard from her mother. Because Brigid had never had anything that was hers in that sense. The house was the husband's, the stove was for serving others, the cornbread was for selling, the children were for raising and letting go. The mountain coffee was for the daughter to carry home in a bag. Her whole life had been other people's, divided among others, spent on others, penny by penny, loaf by loaf. And now, at 76, she discovered there was a piece of the world that was hers. Hers in the one deep way something is yours, because your blood planted it and because nobody else wanted it. Juniper left that evening with no cornbread, no fruit from the yard. She went quiet, with her eyes swollen. And before getting in the truck, she turned to look at the woodhouse, the house where she'd been born, the one they were going to tear down. And for the first time in many years, she looked at it for real, the way you look at what you're going to lose. The husband said something to her, annoyed at the delay. She didn't answer. The truck went off up Galen Street, kicking up dust, and Brigid watched it go from the blue tin gate, arms crossed over her apron, not waving, because between them that evening it wasn't yet the time for goodbyes. I have to say one thing here, and it's worth saying low, the way you say the true things. There's no quick reconciliation in this story. It's not one of those. The daughter who signs the sale of her mother's house isn't forgiven with a hug the next Sunday. These things are forgiven if they're forgiven slow over the years, over many Sundays, by dint of presence and not of words. And sometimes they're never fully forgiven, and you learn to live with the crack, the way you live with a leg that healed crooked from an old fall. You walk a long way, but never the same again. Do you know a mother like that? One who gave everything and in the end found out she had nothing in her name. If this story is touching something inside you, write me below what town or what neighborhood you're from. And tell me one thing. What would you have done in Brigid's place, the junk room or the mountain? There's no easy answer. Subscribe if you want to go with her all the way to the end. Give it a like so this story reaches other women who carried the same thing in silence. And stay, because the most important part is still to come. We still have to see whether a woman of 76 alone can really raise up a homestead that had been fallen for half a century. The days that followed, Brigid split in 2. The morning down in the bottom, the dough, the cornbread, Miss Pearl's order, the crossing of the ford, the market, that she didn't let go of. A person doesn't drop a sure penny from one day to the next, least of all when she's going to need it for what's coming. But the afternoon, instead of resting the way old women rest, she'd grab the sack, the hatchet, and go up. Not all the way to the sycamore, which was 3 hours and didn't fit in a day. She'd go up a piece, Each afternoon a piece more, like somebody getting her body used to a distance, stretching it bit by bit, winning meters off the mountain. And one day she took along to go up the only one left from that old time. His name was Lazarus. Lazarus Pruitt. He was an old man, even older than her, 80 and some, thin as a lathrod, who'd been a hand on the homesteads up there his whole life, and who now lived alone in a shack on the edge of the other side, looking after some goats with no company but a yellow dog as thin as he was. Lazarus had known Eulalia. As a boy, he'd known Grandmother Constance. He was the last one left who remembered the sycamore when the sycamore was alive. Brigid went looking for him one afternoon, took him cornbread and a little of the pulled pork Miss Pearl gave her on Saturdays. They sat outside the shack on 2 stones, with the yellow dog lying between them, and Brigid told him about the house, about the chest, about the seeds, about the sycamore. Lazarus heard her out without interrupting, chewing slow with the few teeth he had left, looking at the mountain in the distance. "The sycamore," he said at last, when Brigid finished. "How long since I heard that name?" He stayed quiet a while. "Your grandmother Constance grew the best blue corn on the whole mountain. She'd trade it at the market for whatever she wanted. Everybody wanted it. They said her corn had something that tasted different." He turned to look at Brigid with his old watery eyes. "And you want to plant up there again? Alone?" "I don't know about alone," said Brigid. "That's why I came to see you." Lazarus laughed, a toothless laugh, soft, that ended in a cough. "Look at me, getting field work at 84. He stroked the yellow dog between the ears. "I can't handle the hoe anymore, Brigid. My hands don't close right anymore. But I still know where each thing goes on that hillside. I remember your grandmother's homestead like I walked it yesterday. I can't dig for you, but I can tell you where to dig. And that's worth more sometimes." And so, without signing anything, without papers, with no deal but the one between 2 old people who understand each other, they became partners. Lazarus the one who knew, Brigid the one who could, the yellow dog thrown in. They started with the water. "Without water there's nothing," Lazarus said. "The water rules." They went up one day, the 2 of them, slow, resting often, Lazarus leaning on a mesquite cane, and Brigid carrying the tools. They reached the dry pond, that puddle of cracked mud where the 2 herons still looked like they were made of stone. Lazarus walked the edge slow, tapping the ground with the cane, smelling the air, bending down to grab handfuls of dirt from the cracked bottom and crumbling them between his fingers. "There's water here," he said, "down below. The pond isn't dead. It's sleeping. It's silted up, filled with dirt over the years. The eye got covered. We have to uncover it, dig out the dry mud, deepen it, clean the spring eye that's got to be down there, plugged up. When the rains come, this fills back up. I saw it full as a boy. The cattle of half the mountain drank here." Uncovering the pond was the hardest part. Weeks. Brigid would go down into the dry mud with a shovel and a bucket, dig, fill the bucket, carry it up, empty it, go back down. The sun beating on her back, the hardened mud like stone that had to be picked at before you could shovel it, the shiny hands, used to the warm, soft clay of the stove, now blistered by the hard, cold mud of the pond, blistered and then calloused another way, a new callus on top of the old. Sometimes Lazarus would come up and sit on the edge on a stone with the dog and tell her where to dig, how far to deepen, how to make the drain so the rainwater came in, but the silt didn't come back. He'd tell her while she dug stories of the old mountain, of when it was full of homesteads and people, of the plantings of the old days, of Grandmother Constance going up with her sack of seeds to plant, singing in the old tongue. "Do you remember the tongue, Lazarus?" "A little. What sticks to you from hearing it?" "Your grandmother prayed in that tongue over the seed before she planted it. A little prayer, I don't know what it said, but I remember the sound. And I remember she kissed it. She kissed the seed." "She kissed it," said Brigid. "Yes, that I remember too." And she kept digging. One afternoon, digging deep in the center of the pond, the shovel scraped something that wasn't mud, a different sound, wet. Brigid bent down, dug with her hands, and all at once the bottom of the hole darkened, got wet, and water began to well up. Slow, cloudy, dirty with dirt at first, but water. The spring eye that had been plugged for half a century, uncovered by the hands of a woman of 76. Brigid stood there in the mud with the water rising slow around her shoes, watching it well up. And she didn't say anything because there are things you don't say you look at. The water. The first living thing she, with her own hands, had brought back to that dead land. Lazarus, sitting on the edge, took off his hat. They cleaned the coffee shrubs after that. That was more pleasure than work. Brigid would go up with the husband's old pruning shears and, shrub by shrub, take off the creeper that choked them, the dry branches, the brush that had grown over them. And the freed shrubs were grateful. In a matter of weeks they put out new leaf, tender leaf of a bright light green. And Lazarus, seeing them, said that for the harvest coming in they were going to give like they hadn't given in 50 years, because the coffee shrub is grateful. It's like good people. You give it a little, and it gives you back a lot. Meanwhile, down below, the clock was running. The 30 days. And Brigid, who's no fool, who never had a single foolish hair, knew she wasn't going to be able to live at the sycamore just like that, from one day to the next. The crib room wasn't ready. The rains hadn't come. The first harvest, God and the land willing, wouldn't be brought in for half a year. She needed a bridge, an in-between time, a meanwhile. And the meanwhile, by one of those turns life takes, Miss Pearl gave her. Because when Brigid told Miss Pearl, now with more confidence, what she was really going to do, not go to her daughters, but go up her mother's mountain to plant, Miss Pearl first thought her crazy. She told her so to her face. "You're crazy, Brigid." And then, hearing her talk about the water that welled up and the shrubs that greened again and Lazarus, who knew where each thing went, her face started to change, from the mockery to the doubt, and from the doubt to something else, something close to respect. And Miss Pearl, who had a little room above her stand at the market, a little room she used as storage for the sacks of corn and the pots, told her, "Look, Brigid, while you fix up your mountain, you stay here. You help me with the pork in the early morning. You keep making your cornbread right here, and you live upstairs. You don't pay me rent, you pay me in hands. How about it?" Brigid thought about it a day, talked it over with Lazarus, and said yes. Because one thing she'd learned from her mother's seeds, that between the planting and the harvest, there's a time of waiting you can't skip, and that in that time you don't starve only because you've got stored from before. Miss Pearl was her stored up. The room over the pork stand was the loft where she'd hold out, while the other thing, the one up above, ripened. So when the 30 days were up, Brigid moved out of the house on Galen Street with no drama. There wasn't much to take. A bed, the sheet metal griddle, the pots, the grinding stone, the clothes, the pictures of the saints, the empty coffee can where she kept the hospital paper for the cataract she never used. She loaded it all in a neighbour's cart in 2 trips and split it up. What was useful for Miss Pearl's room, to Miss Pearl's room. What was useful for the mountain, she took up bit by bit, trip by trip, afternoon by afternoon. Crawford went off to a nephew's in another part of the county. There was no goodbye. 54 years and no goodbye, because there was nothing to say goodbye to, because for a long time there'd been nothing left between them but habit. And habit doesn't say goodbye, it just ends. The day Brigid took out her things, Crawford was sitting on the bench by the courthouse, smoking whatever folks offered him, watching the people go by the way he'd done the last years of his life. He watched her go by, too, with the cart. He didn't get up, she didn't turn. 2 old people who had slept in the same bed for half a century, parting on the street without a word, each one looking the other way. That's how some things end, with no noise, the way the embers of a stove go out when nobody blows on them anymore. The last day in the house on Galen Street, before closing the blue tin gate for the last time, Brigid did one thing. She went to the yard, to the apple tree her mother had planted the year Juniper was born. She gathered 3 ripe apples off the ground, the last ones the tree gave that season, and she cut out the seeds. Well, she set the cores aside, cleaned them, the small dark apple seeds, wrapped them in a cloth and put them in the sack with the other seeds. Because the apple is seed too, and because that tree had been planted by her mother, and because Brigid had now understood fully all the way down that the way not to lose what you love is to keep its seed and plant it again in other ground. She didn't take the tree. You can't take a tree. But she took its descendants in a fold of cloth to plant them up at the sycamore by the crib, where someday, not her but somebody, would eat apples that came in a straight line from the tree in the yard of the house they sold her out of. She closed the gate. It made the same creak it always did, and this time it didn't strike her as absurd. It struck her as right. A sound saying goodbye. The rains came in June, punctual the way the seasonal rains come in the high country, with thunder first, overcast afternoons, the sky going purple over the ridge, and then the water, the fat, warm water that falls in sheets and smells of wet earth. That smell that has no good name but that anybody who's from the country knows. The smell of dry earth when it gets the first rain. The oldest smell in the world. The smell of life starting over. And with the rains Brigid planted. The day had come, the day her mother had kept the seeds for. Half a century. She went up to the sycamore with Lazarus, with the yellow dog, with the bundles of seed in the sack. The pond already had water, a mirror of light brown reflecting the overcast sky, and on its edge the two herons who had never left, fished now for little frogs among the new reeds. The hillside was clear, the furrows opened, Lazarus marking with the cane where Brigid opening with the hoe-how. The dirt black and wet and smelling deep. Brigid knelt down at the first furrow. It was hard for her to kneel. The knees weren't for kneeling anymore, but she knelt. She opened the bundle of blue corn, took a handful, and before throwing it into the dirt, she did what Grandmother Constance had taught her 69 years before on that same hillside. She lifted the handful of seed to eye level. She looked at it with the good eye and with the clouded one. She said low in the old tongue, the two words that meant the one that makes us, the ones that had come out of her hole from the depth of memory, the day she opened the chest and kissed the seed. She kissed it with her lips barely touching, the way you kiss the forehead of a sleeping child, the way she'd seen her grandmother kiss it, the way her mother had kissed it. And she planted it. Lazarus, standing beside her, leaning on the mesquite cane, took off his hat again like at the pond and looked at Brigid kneeling in the furrow, planting her grandmother's corn in her grandmother's dirt. And the old man's eyes welled up just like that. No sobbing. Old tears that ran down the wrinkles until they lost themselves in the 3-day white stubble. Because Lazarus was 84 and had thought he was going to die without ever seeing anybody kiss the seed on that mountain again. And life, stubborn as the coffee shrubs, had kept that morning for him after all. They planted all day, the blue corn up high, where the sun hit best, the beans among the corn so they'd climb, the squash at the edges so it covered the dirt with its leaves, the seeds, the wild greens, everything where Lazarus said and the way the grandmother taught, the whole garden, the 3 sisters together, looking after one another like a family that really looks after its own. And apart, by the crib, in a sheltered corner, Brigid planted the 3 apple seeds from her mother's tree, and the speckled ear, the mother seed. That one she didn't plant. That one she kept. She hung it from a beam inside the crib for next year's seed. Because the mother seed isn't planted whole. It's kept, it's handed down, it's passed on, it goes on. Do you know what it feels like to plant something you won't live to see fully grown? Brigid knew it that evening, kneeling in the furrow at 76 with a cloud in her eye. She knew that she might not see the apples, that an apple tree takes years to give and that she was already counting hers a different way. But she planted it just the same, because planting what you won't see is the most motherly thing there is. And Brigid had been a mother her whole life, mother of children and mother of cornbread and mother of a mountain. And by then, she didn't know how to do anything but plant for those who come after. If you've made it this far with me, let me ask you not to go yet because we still have to tell what happened when Brigid's blue corn came up out of the ground, and we still have to tell what Juniper did the day she went up the mountain without warning. And above all, we still have to tell what Brigid found when she went to hang the mother ear from the crib beam and saw, carved into the old wood, something her grandmother had left written there more than 80 years before. But first, one thing. Go down to the comments and write me the name of the woman who taught you something with her hands, to cook, to plant, to sew, whatever it was, because this video is for them, for all of them, and I want to read their names. Give it a like so the channel takes these stories to more people who need to hear them, and subscribe, because we're going to keep telling lives like Brigid's. Women so quiet, it seemed they carried nothing inside, and they carried everything. Stay. We're almost there. The blue corn came up at 12 days. Brigid saw it one morning going up with the water and the tools. The dirt of the first furrow broken from inside, pushed upward, and peeking out among the clods a little tip, a green spear coiled in on itself, tender, still bent from the effort of coming out, but out, alive. And beside it, another and another, the whole row of the first furrow dotted with green. Grandmother Constance's blue corn being born again in the dirt of the sycamore after 55 years of nobody planting there. Brigid knelt. Again it was hard. Again she knelt and she brought her face close to the first sprout. She looked at it close with the good eye. That little green tip that carried inside it all the strength of the corn, all the stubbornness of the kept seed, all the hand of her mother that set it aside and wrapped it and took it up to the loft, knowing that one day, one far-off day she wouldn't see, her daughter would kneel in this furrow to watch this be born. Brigid ran a finger along the little leaf barely with the shiny pad, and she spoke to it. She said low, "You made it. You just made it." The way you say it to somebody you waited a long time for. And there, kneeling in front of the corn sprout, Brigid understood at last, fully and forever, what her mother had left her. She hadn't left her seeds. The seeds were only the body of the thing. What she had left her was this day, the day on which her daughter, ruined, betrayed, stripped of everything the world counts as worth, would kneel in a mountain to watch the corn be born and would find out that she was rich. Rich in the one way they can't sell you or sign away or take from you with a tape measure on a Tuesday at 11 in the morning. Rich in land and water and seed and knowing what to do with your hands. Eulalia hadn't left her a fortune. She had left her a day like this one. And that day was worth more than the house on Galen Street, more than Joel's debt money, more than all of it. What happened after is told quicker, because life, when it finally finds its channel, runs more even. Juniper went up the mountain in September without warning. Brigid was weeding the garden, already up to her waist, green and tall and full of promise, when she saw a figure coming up the trail, slow, a woman not used to the mountain stopping often. It took her a while to recognize her because she wasn't expecting her. It was Juniper. Alone, no husband, no truck. The truck doesn't go up that far. 3 hours on foot, Juniper had walked to get there, she who arrived late even when she came by car. And she arrived sweated through, her city shoes ruined and caked with dust, her face red from the effort. They didn't say much at first. Juniper looked at the garden, looked at the pond with water, looked at the coffee shrubs heavy with fruit, looked at the crib that Brigid and Lazarus had shored up with its new piece of tin roof and its door and its little wisp of smoke coming out of the stove. She looked at all of it, what her mother alone at 76 had brought up out of a mountain her father swore wasn't good enough to bury the dead in, and she broke down crying again, but different. Not the ugly crying of guilt from the day of the seeds, but another, a cleaner one, the crying of somebody who understands something that took her months to understand. "I brought you this," said Juniper, and she pulled from her bag the empty coffee can, the one Brigid had left forgotten in the move, the one with the hospital paper for the cataract. "Mama, I want to pay for the eye operation. I saved up. I sold some things. Reuben doesn't know, but I saved up. Let me do this, please. Let me do one thing right." Brigid wiped the dirt off her hands on her apron, looked at her daughter, looked at the can, and here the one telling this story has to confess that he doesn't know whether what Brigid felt was forgiveness. Maybe not. Maybe full forgiveness never came, and what came was something else, something more of the country. The acceptance that bad land, if it's worked, sometimes gives, and that a daughter who signs a betrayal if she climbs 3 hours of mountain with her mother's eye operation in a can, maybe is opening her own furrow. Late, clumsy, but opening it. "All right," said Brigid, just that. "All right, girl." And she let her come up into the crib. She gave her coffee. Mountain coffee, from the shrubs gone green again, roasted on the griddle and ground in her mother's stone, served in a clay cup. And the two of them sat outside in the wide shade of the sycamore, watching the garden move in the wind, not talking much, because they didn't need to talk much anymore. Brigid had the eye operated on in November in the county seat with the money Juniper saved up. They took off the cloud, and the first thing she saw on the way back with both eyes clear for the first time in years, coming up the sycamore trail one cold December morning, was her whole garden, golden now, ready for the harvest, her grandmother's blue corn swaying on the hillside under the clean sky, with the sycamore enormous keeping watch over all of it, and the pond shining like a piece of mirror, and the smoke from the crib rising straight up in the windless air. She saw it with both eyes, clear, whole. For the first time she saw whole what her hands had made, and she stood there on the trail a long while looking at it, both eyes full of water, but seeing. Seeing clear as anything, better than ever. That year's harvest was good. Miss Pearl's pork started carrying blue cornbread from the sycamore, and the market folks asked after it. "What's in this cornbread that tastes different?" And Miss Pearl said with pride, like it was her own doing, "It's from Miss Brigid's corn, the one she grows on her mountain." Her mountain. Everybody called it that now, Miss Brigid's mountain. Lazarus got to see 2 harvests. He died in the shack asleep with the yellow dog at his feet. One March night, 3 years after that Tuesday of the white truck, Brigid buried him in the old churchyard in town and planted at his head, in place of a cross, a coffee shrub from the sycamore, from the great-grandfathers, so it would give shade and bean over the old man who had taught her where the water was. The yellow dog went up the mountain and stayed to live with Brigid, and they say it would lie down in the furrow where Lazarus used to sit and direct the planting, and there it would stay for hours, watching the garden like it was waiting on him. And the mother ear, that part I promised. The day Brigid went up for the first time to hang the speckled ear from the crib beam to keep it for seed, she pulled up the bench, climbed up with an old woman's care, and as she went to tie the ear to the old beam, the one that had held up 55 years, she saw that there was something carved in the wood. Marks. She cleaned them with her thumb, wiping off the dust of half a century. They were letters, rough, made with a knife, big, uneven, made by a hand that carved with effort, the same way it wrote with effort. And Brigid, who by then was starting to put letters together better, because Juniper had begun teaching her in the evenings in the crib by lamplight. "Because it's never too late," the daughter would say, and the mother let herself be taught by the daughter what the daughter as a child had learned from the mother. And so a circle closed. Brigid spelled out slow what her grandmother Constance had carved into that beam, who knows in what year, before Eulalia was born, before any of them. It said in the old tongue above and in English below with mistakes, carved deep so it would last, "Constance planted here. Whoever is hungry, let them plant." And below, the 2 words, the same as always, the one that makes us. Brigid stayed up on the bench with the mother ear in one hand and the other over her grandmother's letters a long while, and she understood the last thing she had left to understand. That she hadn't started anything, that she hadn't saved anything, that all she had done was take hold again of a thread her grandmother had tied to that beam more than 80 years before, a thread her mother had held and kept in a chest, a thread that now she held, and that she was going to have to hand on in her turn to somebody before she let it go, because that's what they were. Links, hands that receive seed, and hands that hand on seed, one after another, crossing the years, crossing the houses that get sold, and the quiet husbands and the fevers that kill, holding up the only thing that truly doesn't end if it's cared for. She hung the mother ear from the beam next to the letters, climbed down off the bench, and from below she looked at the 2 things together, what her grandmother carved and what she was hanging up, the promise and the seed, the hunger and the cure for hunger. Brigid Talley Sanders lived at the sycamore the rest of her years. They weren't few. The land, the mountain air, the pond water, the steady work with no boss straightened her out more than any medicine. She planted every season as long as her legs held, and when her legs no longer held, she'd sit in a chair in the shade of the sycamore and tell the ones who came up to help her, because others ended up coming up, young folks of the town she taught, girls above all, that she gave seed to on the one condition that they set aside from their harvest to plant again and to give away, where each thing went, the same as Lazarus had told her, the same as Grandmother Constance had told Eulalia. The one who knows, sitting in the shade saying where. The ones who can, kneeling in the furrow planting. Juniper went up every Sunday, no longer to carry off cornbread in a bag, but to plant with her mother. She learned already grown, what as a child she hadn't gotten to learn because she'd been raised for the shop and the square, and not for the mountain. She learned to taste the dirt with her tongue. It took her the way it takes everybody who learns grown. But she learned. And one Sunday, kneeling beside her mother, she lifted a handful of blue corn to eye level, looked at it and said the two words in the old tongue that Brigid had taught her, that Eulalia had taught Brigid, that Constance had taught Eulalia. And she kissed the seed. And Brigid, sitting in her chair in the shade, watching her, said nothing. But that was, of the whole story, the one time the one who tells it can say for certain that Brigid felt the circle was finally closed, that what she received she had handed on, that she could now, when the day came, let go of the thread in peace, because on the other side there was already a hand holding it. The house on Galen Street they tore down. They put up some ugly rental rooms of grey block, no yard, no apple tree, no soul. Brigid passed by there once, years later, and felt nothing. Or felt just one small thing standing in front of the block rooms, that she was glad not to be there, that they had taken her out of a house that was made of paper to send her, without meaning to a land that was made of blood, that the worst day of her life, the Tuesday of the white truck, the hand in the dough, the paper on top of the flour, had been seen from far off, from the mountain, from the two clear eyes, as the day that saved her. Because there are dispossessions that are doors, there are losses that uncover, the way a spring eye gets uncovered, something that was down there, alive, waiting, plugged up only by the silt of a life too busy surviving to climb up and go looking for it. The apple tree of the sycamore, the 3 seeds from her mother's tree, bore fruit. Brigid didn't get to eat many. She got to eat the first ones, that she did. One of the last evenings, already very old, sitting in her chair under the sycamore, Juniper brought her an apple from those trees, cut up with a little salt and a warm slice of blue cornbread. And Brigid ate apple from the tree that came from the tree her mother planted the year Juniper was born, with bread from the corn her grandmother kept, sitting in her great-grandfather's land with her daughter beside her. She ate slow, savouring it, running the tip of her tongue along her upper lip, the way she did as a child with the dough, the way she did with the dirt, tasting, feeling for the right point. And everything that evening was just right. The whole of life fit in that bite, all of it whole. The corn, the apple, the salt, the daughter, the shade, the mountain, the one that makes us. Good dough, she thought. And at last, good day. And here ends what's known of Brigid Talley Sanders, the woman from the other side who on a Tuesday at 11 in the morning was left with no house and her hand in the dough, and who instead of going off to the junk room grabbed a hatchet and a sack and climbed 3 hours of mountain to collect an inheritance of seeds her mother had kept for her half a century, and who with those seeds and her 2 shiny hands raised up from the brush the fallen homestead of her blood, and gave the water back to the pond and the corn back to the hillside, and who died rich, rich in land, rich in a daughter recovered, rich from having understood in time what it is that truly doesn't end. In what was hers under the shade of the sycamore that watches over her land still, where they say the garden goes on giving every season, planted by the young hands she taught where each thing goes, and to kiss the seed, and to always set aside from every harvest a handful for the one who's coming. If this story reached something inside you, do me a favor that costs nothing and is worth a lot. Leave me in the comments the name of that woman in your family, your mother, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, who held up her own with her hands and who almost nobody talks about, so that here, even if only here, her name stays written down like a creed, the way Constance left it carved in the beam. Give it a like if you believe these quiet women deserve to have their stories told, and subscribe because every week I put up a new one. And if we reach 100,000 subscribers together, I've got a story ready for you that I've been keeping, the way you keep the mother seed, the best of all, set aside for when there are more of us sitting down to hear it. Thank you for climbing this mountain with me all the way to the top.